Hello, everyone. My name is Maria, and I'm an education coordinator at Creator Training Center. Welcome to the first creative software session organized within CGAcademy. We will be hosting 4 online sessions with different topics for every few weeks, covering various themes throughout CGAcademy, in which we want to address students, young people in our industries, people who are still searching for themselves, but also to professionals who work in the industries. Within these creative software sessions, we're going to discuss about news, new tools, and work processes in software, primarily used in VFX and gaming. Then there are going to be sessions about jobs and careers, where we are going to discuss with professionals about jobs in VFX, gaming, and design. And then there will be know-how sessions. The accent will be on tips and tricks in workflow and also on soft skills needed for everyone who wants to work in these industries. This session is organized by Creator Training Center and supported by Epic Games, Trilateral, Nordeus Hub, and the Serbian Gaming Association, and I want to thank them all for their support. Now I want to present you our session for today, exploring the Quixel ecosystem, and our guest, Luis Cataldi, who is Quixel lead evangelist and who works for Epic Games company. I won't tell you much about his biography because you can read it online. I just want to emphasize that Luis has a great experience in VFX and gaming, and then he helped forming the educational department in Epic Games. So now I would like to announce Luis. Hello.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, fine, thank you. I have to notice you have a nice haircut.
Thank you. This is my quarantine haircut.
We all have this.
It's like yours, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we have the same one. Okay, I won't ask you much questions. I just want to ask you something that was intriguing for me. If you can explain, what does it mean and what does it take to become an evangelist for Epic Games company?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I think as hopefully you all know, Epic has a wonderful habit of making amazing software, but also acquiring amazing companies like Quixel, and taking something that used to cost a lot of money. I made a game back in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006 in Unrealengine 3. I was a art director for a game called Frontlines Field of War and Homefront that was made in Unrealengine 3. And back in that time when you licensed Unrealengine 3, it was a very expensive to license Unrealengine 3 from Epic. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to get access to the Perforce branch. And, when Unreal Engine 4 came out, they said, well, now it's free for everyone, right? And everyone has access to the source code. And of course, before Quixel joined Epic Games, getting access to the full Megascan library, was very expensive. But now everyone who has an Epic ID and has access to Unreal Engine has full free access to the Megascans library. So in a world and in a company where we give away the software, basically, where everyone can use it, of course we have salespeople, but how do you get people to become aware of this amazing software? How do you get people to learn this amazing software? That's where they employ evangelists, right? So, my job is an evangelist, and the team of evangelists at Epic, whether it's on the Unreal Engine side, whether it's on the education side, and whether it's on the Quixel side, our job is to help people understand the value of the power and really how this software can be used in games, how it can be used in filmmaking, architecture, automotive, and across many things, medical development, bioengineering, aerospace, all the different fields, mostly from an awareness building, from an education aspect, and all those different things, and help people understand how to utilize these amazing tools. So Evangelism is interesting on our end because we help people to understand how to harness these tools in a world where I don't have to sell you something aside from helping you understand that it's here for everyone to use. It's free to use and to motivate you to learn that this is a powerful tool and you have to put in the time to make it worth your while. I know that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully it helped.
Yeah, it's a great answer because it's very strange, about when we're talking about job position, I was like, what does it mean, evangelist? So I know that it's some kind of not preaching, but letting people know, letting everyone know what's happening actually. So thank you very much for this answer. And now, without further ado, the floor is yours, Luis, and see you later.
Thank you very much. I look forward to it. Okay, so, we don't have a tremendous amount of time, but it's my goal today to show everyone here how we can use the Quixel ecosystem. And we call it an ecosystem because there is, of course, a Megascans library, which has 14,737 different 3D and 2D type assets that are all amazingly photogrammetry scanned assets available to anyone who has an Epic ID. And if you don't have an Epic ID, you can still purchase a license to access the Megascans library and use it with a variety of different content creation tools like Houdini and Blender. And in many cases, if you're working in a studio that doesn't use Unrealengine, you can still gain full access to the library and use it with your own bespoke engine. And we're going to go through Qixel Bridge, which is a tool that's freely available from the Quixel website. And you can see up here on the Quixel website, which I'm at, that you can go to the product section. And of course, you can browse the Megascan library, but you can also download Quixel Bridge for absolutely free. And we'll talk about what Quixel Bridge is and what it does and how it can be of use to everyone. And you can also download Quixel Mixer, and we'll dig into Quixel Mixer a little bit and understand how you can use it to non-destructively access the entire Megascans library, how you can use it to procedurally modify almost any asset inside of the Megascan library and modify it, make it. Are you all still there? What happened? I'm sorry about that. I've had some people working in the street, and I believe that we're having some power issues in the neighborhood here. But anyway, I was telling you about Quixel Mixer, and it is available for free for everyone to download as well. So let me show you what we're going to try and work through Quixel Bridge and Quixel Mixer to make here. And we'll see how quickly we can get to making it, all right? And we'll work through both of these tools to access it and make it. So I've actually created a small environment inside of Unrealengine here. And this is utilizing Quixel Bridge and Mixer to create a small environment. And of course, it's got Unrealengine lighting. And I'm going to hit F11 on my keyboard so you can sort of see a variety of different Quixel assets. So this utilizes, 5 or 6 different Quixel assets. And I've also created a couple of different blueprints that make it a lot easier to propagate it. And I've got some hotkeys here that create some camera bookmarks. And it uses the cloud systems in Unrealengine, and it uses the terrain features of landmass. And I'm going to try as quickly as possible to reassemble this environment using Quixel Bridge and Mixer. And we'll see how quickly we can make something like this, kind of cooking show style, to see if we can actually show you how these tools work. So I'll hit F11. And we'll start first with Quixel Bridge. So if I bring Bridge over, and I'm going to close Quixel Mixer for the moment. So Quixel Bridge gives you access to the entire Megascans library. And I should point out that if you already have an Unreal Engine account, you come up here to where you sign in, and you can just sign in with your Epic ID. And this makes the entire 14,713 set of assets completely available to you. And when you install and launch Qixel Bridge, you basically begin here in our home page. And here, this is constantly updated, and it shows you basically all the things that are available to you in the Megascans library. You see all the different new surfaces that are available to you. You see all the new 3D assets that are available to you, and you can scan through these page after page. You see all the new 3D plants. You see all the latest collections. So we have a wood plank collection. This is all brand new, the Desert Medieval collection. And this is an actual collection from a set of an environment that you can actually go and download from the marketplace, the Epic Games marketplace. And it shows you all the different assets that were used in that marketplace. And you can click on any one of these and actually go and download that and start working with it right away. But if I go back to, once again, the home section here, we can go through, look at different more collections, mud, ground, crops, swords, daggers, more different 3D assets. We can look at all the different types of assets that are available. We have 3D assets, plants, surfaces, decals, imperfections. Imperfections is a fantastic library of different stains and stones and wipes and grunges. And these are really valuable to layer on top of a variety of different things that you can build in Mixer to add a tremendous amount of detail to the work that you're generating in there. And then we also have these trending sections. So we've got the latest assets, and this is all the trending stuff. This is what people are going and pulling down now. And so you can see that thatching grass is really popular. This is one of the assets that I'm currently using in this environment. This is the thatching grass that you can see here. And you can see that some of these Nordic assets are really popular, and people are using this stuff quite a bit. And so as we look here in the browser section here, you can once again look through all the different types of 3D assets, and everything is broken down into subcategories of things here. So we can see buildings, historical elements. So, these are all the different historical 3D and 2D assets that are available, industrial 3D assets, nature 3D assets, so different rocks and snowbanks and so forth, props of all different kind. And once again, once you click on something, it exposes subcategories, subcategories of hardware, accessories, chains, electrical, trash, and subcategories of trash, weaponry, wheels, and so forth. Then we can go into 3D plants, and this is really well done, all different types, different common ferns, and then I can go into the variety of different ferns, different kinds of cactus. And what's really valuable is if you click on any particular thing that you're interested in, let's say I'm interested in this cactus, I can pop into and examine this to the next level of detail so that you can see that there's a small viewport in the top right that pops up. If I want to examine this in greater detail, I can maximize this window and I can look at it in much more detail. And you'll see a series of icons in the top left. Right now, I'm looking at just the icon, but I can look at this in 3D. And if I click on it, it gives me a 3D view of it. And now I can pan around it with my left mouse button. I can use my mouse wheel to zoom in very close to it, pan around it. I can also click on the textures and look at each individual texture. And on the lower left, I can look at the albedo texture, the displacement for it, the normal map for it, the roughness, and back to the albedo. If I go back to the 3D model, I can zoom in again, and I can look at the PBR view for it. I can also look at the albedo mode for it, and so I can see what the actual albedo texture looks like. I can look at normal, I can look at roughness, and I can actually examine the wireframe for it as well. Not only wireframe for the highest LOD, but I can also march down all the different level of details and look at the lowest level of detail. So I can see what the lowest level of detail would look like, you know, at a distance. So I can see how the silhouette shifts as I'm moving through all the level of details for such a thing. I can also look, if I go back to PBR mode, what this looks like at 4K resolution, if I want to make sure that this will hold up if I'm looking at it for a cinematic shot or something for a virtual production shoot, if that's of importance to me. Additionally, I have more important things that I can look at here. I've got a scale reference. I can see the size compared to a human figure, and I can find out if this asset is open or closed. So this can be a really important thing to know. There are many assets that maybe are cliffside that are open, as well as it will give me related assets. So it'll show me all the different other cactus that are available to me. So you can once again see that there are many subcategories of tropical plants. And once again, you can click on it and see many other subcategories nested within there. We also have all the different types of surfaces. And then this also, you know, for instance, you're looking for sand and you wanted to see very particular type of sand, like sand that has, you know, footsteps inside of it, or sand that has gravel, all types of different details that can be marched in there. We also have a variety of decals, and what's important to sort of pay attention to as you're looking at all the different assets in the library is what's available in each category, right? So 3D assets, typically you've got your mesh, all the different level of details for your mesh, then you've got the different textures that are associated with it. But if you click on a decal, you'll notice that here we have the textures and the type of textures that are available for decals. We have the albedo, the displacement, the normal, the roughness, and that's really about it. It gives you much more of a tighter subset of textures that are available for decals. And if we go to atlases, they're very different than the decals and the surfaces. In atlases, we've got albedo, AO, displacement, normal, opacity, and roughness, because these are intended to be used in a very different way than something like a decal. These are intended to be used as something that you would put on a surface and used as a transparency, or maybe layer in another way. You might even just mask these things out separately. So you'll see that this comes with an AO map, a displacement, a normal map, with the intention of using it completely differently. Imperfections are also the same thing. If we click on one of these, you'll see this only comes with a gloss map and a mask, a roughness, gloss, mask. So these things are really only intended to be used for very specific use cases. Same thing with displacements. Displacements just give you displacement and normal map, displacement and normal map. And our brushes are just basically opacity, right? So this just gives you a mask that you can use to paint and stamp things into particular, you know, mask operation and brush operations. So that gives you the rough idea of all the different categories of things that are in the library. And because there are so many different things, how do you go and find something very specific? Well, this search bar can be really valuable. So if you're interested in finding a particular type of wood, you might type in wood, and then you can see here that it gives you some different delineators. Well, what kind of wood would you be looking for? So you can say, I want wood, I want the wood to be old. So you can say, I want old wood. And now it gives you old wood here in your viewport. I want old wood that is brown, you know, so I can say old brown wood. And now you've got all the different old wood that is brown. And I want old wood brown that is a surface. So now you've isolated everything to an old brown wood that is a surface. And so that's one way to sort of narrow down from 14,000 assets to a much smaller subset of assets. And you can even mix this with maybe instead of doing that, you can come down here to the search categories and say, well, actually what I want is 3D assets, and I want 3D assets that are anywhere from 2 to 4 meters in size, and I want them to be all old, and I want them to be from maybe the urban environment, and I want them to all be brown, and maybe I want them to be, I don't know, stairs. And so do we have any stairs that match all that description? So that's how I can narrow it down to 1 or 2 different assets that fit that. So be aware that this search function is available. And once I find something like this and I don't want to lose it, what I can do is favorite it by clicking on the heart. And I might even begin the download process. So I can click on that download process and keep everything in this one window. I don't have to actually click on the download down here. And you'll see that once it starts the download process, I get a little check mark here, which is currently green, which means that I've selected this asset, I've identified it, and once it completes the download, it should turn blue for me, letting me know that it's now part of my local collection, which are part of these sections below here. Now you see that it's turned blue, and now I can take a look, and it's here where all my little check marks are blue, which means that this is part of my local collection. Now I can tell my local collection here to be anywhere I want it to be. It can be at any part of my hard drive. It can be, I can identify an external hard drive to maintain my local collection, or at any point I can move my local collection because this thing can grow to be significantly large. Now, at any point, any of these assets I can decide to export just by clicking on this export button. But the question is where is it going to export it to, right? And so this is where I come here to the right side, and I've got a little gear over here. And this gear is where I can define my download settings and my export settings. So let's take a look at these settings. So here in my export settings, which is the first thing that or my download settings is the first thing that I clicked on. And so my download settings is how I can download these things into a local repository. And the first section is textures. So I can download textures to be JPEG, EXR, or both the JPEG and EXR. And here you can see I can download for the majority of these categories a huge variety of different texture types. So albedo, metalness, roughness, specular, diffuse, gloss. If I click those on, displacement, normal, normal bump, and all these different texture types. If I click over here to the model, I can download FBX, OBJ, and Alembic, and I have all the different level of details, all the way up to level of detail 8 if it's appropriate for the 3D model. One of the other things that's really valuable if I'm working on a virtual production type shoot, or really want to make sure that I'm working with digital content creation tools, I can always also download the high poly source. So if I've scanned, or the Quixel team has scanned an asset, and I want to make sure that I can see that asset at the highest level of detail, I can always grab that. But I can also grab the ZBrush tool as well if I want to go into ZBrush and maybe even paint more detail in there as well. And I can always grab the brush itself so that a ZBrush artist can enhance and augment it to the next level. Now, if I go to my export settings, it's here that I can do a whole lot more, right? So working in Unrealengine, I can define Unrealengine, but I can also export to 3D Studio Max, Maya, Unity, Blender, Mixer, or I can choose a custom socket. So if I'm working at a game studio that has its own game engine, or whatever the case might be, we have an API that allows you to connect your own custom sockets to export to whatever you want to, or you can export straight to your disk so you can have access to all the raw data itself. With regard to exporting to Unreal Engine 4, you can export and load a plugin all the way from Engine 4.22 to 4.26. And by choosing this and telling where your plugin folder is, and it gives you a little bit of instruction here, it'll automatically go and install the Unreal Engine plugin, which will, as you can see here, load the Megascans plugin for you. Then I tell it where my working project is. And now at any point, I can go in here and just click on one button and launch an asset directly to Quixel. So let me show you how that works. Right here, this asset currently is not in my scene, but if I click on export, you'll see here in a moment that it starts to import it directly into Unreal Engine. And it says, you know, the typical thing that no smoothing groups are available to me, but now I can come and find this rock. And let me go and see where it is. Where did it put it? There's the big rock that I just was looking at right there. And you can see that it brings it in and creates a material instance for it. So I can take a look at that material instance. And we'll take a look at this a little bit more in a few minutes. And I can modify the material instance, and there's a master material available to me that I can take a look at here as well. And this master material drives all the materials for the Quixel ecosystem with regard to Unreal Engine 4. So this is the same asset that I was looking at over here. So that's how quickly and easily you can export from Bridge directly into Unreal Engine. Now, there's some really powerful additional things that you can do. So I can go into the texture settings here, and I'm already preset to Unreal Engine 4. Now I can go in and say, well, for surfaces, I want to do some very specific operations. Maybe in my albedo, I want to channel pack my information. Maybe not so much in the albedo channel, but maybe for some of my other channels, maybe in the roughness channel, I want to do some different operations, or maybe I want to create my own channel and my mask channel, or something to that nature. I want to, instead of putting albedo green, I want to put my cavity map inside of my green channel, and I want to put my, I don't know, roughness inside of my blue channel, or whatever. You can decide however you want to do this, but this is fairly common in some situations where you take an RGB and you put, you know, cavity in one channel, a grayscale map of roughness in another channel, and something else in the third channel, and that saves in some situations on memory footprint, because specifically if you're outputting, you know, 2K or 4K maps, it can make for smaller file sizes if you channel pack. And then, of course, here you have the opportunity to make this linear or sRGB, and whether you're going 8-bit or not 8-bit for those images. So you can do this not only per surface, but you can do this for 3D assets, plants, decals, and so forth. So this is a really powerful thing to be able to do while working inside of the engine. And here, once again, in the model, you get the opportunity to work in OBJ or FBX with regard to which output you're going to. The other thing to be aware of is that you also have the option here to export to EXR, PNG, and TGA with regard to which engine or digital content creation tool you're going for. And then you also have the option of just defining how your naming conventions work directly in your export settings. So this is really powerful coming out of Bridge. So now let's talk a little bit about Quixel Mixer. So in this environment here, there's a couple things that I did. One of the very first things that I did is I created my own terrain for this environment, right? So I created this terrain material that I wanted to use as a layout. And so let's actually start building this material from scratch. I'm sorry, this environment from scratch. And the way that I started basically is I did a brand new level, and I used the time of day level as my beginning footprint, right? Because I didn't want to start from scratch. I know we don't have a tremendous amount of time for today's lecture. So I started by taking the text render and the floor and getting rid of that. And I got rid of this sphere. And I actually turned on a couple of plugins, right? So I went into the settings and I went into the plugins and I turned on the landmass plugin. So if you go in and turn in landmass, I turned on landmass plugin, and that gives me the ability to use the built-in blueprint brushes for landmass, which can be really powerful. So that's already turned on. And so now when I go into the landscape tool, I can make a smallish landscape, and I'm going to turn on and make this maybe something like 127, and I'm going to make this 1024 by 1024. But I'm going to reduce the size of this to something like 10 by 10. Let's see if that's about the size I want to work at. I think that'll be good. And now what I want to do is come up here and turn on the edit layers. But I want to create an actual ground material to work from. So this is where I'm going to employ Quixel Mixer to actually create a surface for the ground plane. So I'm going to go and turn on Quixel Mixer and actually make a ground terrain. Now, you can get really elaborate and fairly complicated in making your ground materials. So I'm going to come over here to Quixel Mixer, and Quixel Mixer, we'll do a little overview first of it, and I'm going to create a new mix, and you can make a new project. And the very first things that you want to do is say, well, what's my working resolution? And I think a 4K resolution, I can work all the way up in 8K, but I think a 4K resolution will be fine. And I'm going to call this my demo ground. Now, one thing that's important to note here is that you've got a viewport, and I can hold down the Alt key and pan around my viewport. I can use my middle mouse button and move it side to side. And here on the top left, I've got my viewport. I've got a local library, and this local library has categories. And I've got surfaces, atlases, 3D imperfections, a lot of the same thing that we saw in Bridge. And I've got an online library here. An online library, once again, has the same thing, full access to the Megascan library. And then also here, I've got the ability to view everything from albedo to metalness to roughness, basically a similar access to the viewport that we saw in Bridge. I've got a couple of different ways to view lighting. I can view lighting in a different ways here. I can look at indoor lighting, fluorescent lighting, studio lighting, street lighting, and so forth. If I hold down my Shift key, I get to view lighting in here a little bit differently. And then I also get to either work in 2D or 3D inside of Mixer as well. But right now, for the moment, we're going to work in 2D. So the very first thing I want to do is go and pull in some kind of sand to make my terrain. So I'm going to go up here, and in the top right, I like to think of Mixer very much like Photoshop, because in many ways it shares a lot of similarities to Photoshop. So I've got my base layer, and it's just the base gray layer, and it says layers up here. So the very first thing I want to do is add a surface, right? So if I click on add a surface, it's going to go and find my local library, and here's where I've already pulled down a whole series of surfaces, just like the surfaces that are available to me in the online library through Mixer, through Bridge, I mean. And so once again, you can search the library like anything else. And One of the ones that I've already identified that I like a lot is this Thai clay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and select the Thai clay, and it'll bring in that surface for me, and it'll lay it right on top of this gray base layer. So I'm going to turn off the gray base layer, and we get to see this clay layer. And once again, if I hold down my shift and use my right mouse button, I can move the light over top of this flat plane. Now, you can view this plane as a cube if you want to, so you can sort of take a look at it. You can view it as a rounded cube, so you can take a look at it in this way. You can view this as a sphere if you prefer to sort of see how it looks. And this can be, you know, just a couple of different viewing modes. However, I'm going to work with it as a plane. And here on the right side, I've got a panel that allows me to sort of take a look at the albedo for it. And if I look at the albedo, I can modify the contrast of it a little bit. I can modify the opacity of it. And of course, it really doesn't change much because there's nothing to change it against. But I can even go and, you know, change the roughness of it if I wanted to do such a thing, displacement. And some of those things do actually work. So if I went in here and changed the strength of the displacement, I can, you know, amplify the strength of the displacement. Same thing with the normal and so forth. And the other thing that's really powerful over here in the stack is that I can actually change the frequency and the threshold. Right now it's set to 6. I can change the low frequency and the high frequency of things. So you can see I can amplify and tune in and dial in some of the things that it comes in with. So this is the low and high frequency information that comes with the actual base surface. I can also go to the placement, and right now it's set to offset. And you can see that if I hit T on my keyboard, it actually turns on the tiling for it, shows me the tiling mode, so I can offset it in either direction. And I'll set those back to 0. I can rotate it, which will break it a little bit, so I don't want to do that. And I can also scale it. So I'll set that back to 1. I'll hit the T key to go back to non-tiling mode. And so what I want to do now is start to layer in some additional information into it. So one thing that I might do is to bring in some additional stuff for it. So I'm going to bring in another surface, and let's see what I want to bring into it here. I found maybe some rocks that come in from underneath. So let's bring in some Icelandic rocks. And you can see that these rocks come in, and they kind of come in from below, right? So, and I have full control over how everything gets layered together, right? So I've got my base layer. And so what I showed you was the placement of it. But by default, I also, and I'm going to turn off that layer that I just brought in. Right now, that's trying to apply itself from below, but I also have the ability to modify the threshold and the radius, but it has nothing to modify those against. So now that I brought in this layer above, you can see that that layer is currently coming in from below, and I can modify the threshold of how it's coming in, and by changing the threshold, it pushes that new layer in from below, and it pushes it in to above. So this is an interesting way to blend two of these surfaces together. And what the radius is going to do is going to sort of flare out the influence of the two surfaces together. Now, if I choose, I can have it come in from above, which gives it a very different effect. And now the threshold is going to affect it. It's just kind of sort of lay it on top like molded plastic, which kind of changes it all together. And now the radius is going to influence it in a very different way. It kind of comes in a very different way. And so what I want to do, and I'll keep it from below, I think that works better for this particular asset, and change the threshold So that just kind of pokes through. But what I want to do is to actually change the albedo so that it matches more closely. And one thing that I can do is middle click the albedo. And what it's going to try and do is average the two texture colors together. And now I can bring up that color and try and darken it just a little bit so that it feels like it's of similar color with just a little bit of difference. Or maybe I brighten it so those rocks actually come in as brighter rocks. Maybe that looks a little bit better. So they're a little bit more ashy rocks. And hit apply. And one thing that I can do is really flare out the radius and maybe even change the roughness a little bit, so that as I flare the light over top of it, those rocks are much shinier as they're coming in. So it feels like an ashy layer of rock that comes on top. And I might even change the opacity so that it's just not quite as harsh, right? And so that gives me this layer of ashy rock that's coming on top. Now I might want a smaller layer of rocks that also appear on top of everything. And I'll hit the T key just to see how it's all tiling, and that all looks very interesting. Now one thing I might do right away is hit Control D to duplicate the layer. And I might take that layer and I might rotate it and change the opacity even more. Maybe even darken that layer just a little bit and offset it just a little bit so that it helps to sort of break up this tiling, right? So you can see here, it just sort of breaks up that tiling and makes it not feel so repetitive. Maybe let's see it, darken it just a wee bit more, maybe bring up the color just a little bit. And what I might do also, since it starts to get a little surface noisy, is change the low frequency and high frequency just a little bit. And I might change the high frequency of this one a little bit as well. So it just gives it a little bit more interest and starts to look a little cooler. The other thing I can do is decide to just drop the displacement down so these things don't poke up so much. All right, cool. So I'll change the tiling back. And now let's go in, and instead of bringing in a surface, let's bring in a atlas or decal layer. And so once again, I can go to my online library and search for atlases, but I've already found a couple, identified a couple. And one of them is this chipped rock layer. And so I can bring in these chipped rocks, and you can see that it brings in all these tiny little rocks, right? And they come in with all these alphas. And so that's one of the nice things, is that you'll see that the blend mode that they come in with is masked, right? And so now I can come in here and change that frequency and actually bring in the high frequency a little bit more. Maybe change the albedo so they're not so dark that they pull so much focus. And it just gives me a little bit of a layer of darker rock, maybe a little less bright. And maybe change the tiling a little bit, right? So I can maybe repeat these 2 and 2. That makes them a little bit smaller. Let's go like that. And we'll hit the T key and see how that looks. Maybe it's a little dark. Let's brighten them up just a touch more. Maybe these are actually brighter. Yeah, that looks better. And actually, let's make the roughness so that these stones are even rougher, so that they really pull brightness. Cool. And then we'll add one more layer. We'll add a set of twigs that come in. So we'll add some fallen branches. And we'll keep these nice and dark. You see the fallen branches that have come in there. And we might tile these a little bit more. Maybe we'll change these to 2. and 2. And once again, we can change the low and high frequency to make these pop a little bit more. And you can, keep going as much as you want. Let's make one more layer adjustment, which is we're going to actually add some noise to it. And I'll hit the tiling here. And this noise can be really helpful because I can actually change the frequency and the amplitude of the noise and just add a little bit of lumpiness to the terrain. So this can be a really nice, helpful thing to do, just to add some more visual interest. Maybe not too much. Something like that. By the time I've gotten it and noodled it into the position that I want, you can always save it. And I'm going to call this my new demo. I've already saved it. Maybe, and keep in mind that all of this is non-destructive, right? So if I decide to come in here and say, you know what, I really prefer this to be lighter or darker. Maybe my base color's too bright or something like that, and I want that to be a little darker. Say, sure, apply. Then what I get to do is say export it to the library. So I'm going to call this my new ground demo. I'm going to put it in a category of ground and say export. And when I export it and I go back to Bridge, you'll see here that it shows up into my mixer library. And if I give it a second here, local mixer, here it is, my ground demo. So it shows up as in my mixer library. And I can actually come here and take a look at it. So there's the new terrain material that I just created. And so one of the cool things that I can do is export it directly into Unrealengine. Oops, excuse me. Cool. So it actually pops right in. And there it comes. And there it is, my ground demo 2. And so I can actually take this, my demo ground, and plop it right there and say create terrain. And so because I turned on edit layers for my ground, I can actually come to the sculpt brush here and then go to sculpts and go to the blueprints and click the blueprint and get a blueprint brush. After I say, give me a landmass, and I get a landmass. Cool. I'm going to zoom in here. Now, I don't want to spend too terrible much time in here noodling with this, but before I actually do, I'm going to change the scale of this a little bit so that I can, let me pull this into the right place. I can go into the UV controls and go into the tiling for the UV controls. And I can say 0.1. Let's try 0.05. Now, is that the right one? It's not the right one. Let's see. No, that's the one. Lewis ground. Did I export the right one? Let me see here. Maybe I did not send the right one. Ground demo. My ground demo. My ground demo. That's the right one. My ground. My demo ground. Is that the right thing? My demo ground, okay. Yes to all. And let's select the landscape and make sure that it's got the right material. My demo ground, that's better. My demo ground. That's not correct. Which one are you? That is not correct at all. All right, I'm not going to futz with it because I don't want to waste too much time. But let's just scale this one. And where's my UV tiling here? Tiling 0.05, 0.05. You get the idea. Now I can go into the landscape brush. And for those of you who haven't messed around with the landscape brush before, this is a really amazing, amazing tool. I'm going to do a couple of really quick things. I'm going to cap the shape. I'm going to move it down a little bit. I'm going to change the fall off angle so it smooths it just a touch, maybe down to maybe 20. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to turn off blur for now and set it to 0. I'm going to turn on a little bit of curl. You can see that it starts to make some interesting shapes already. Maybe curl, just a modest curl. There we go. And then I'm going to turn on, one thing I'm going to do because this lighting already is bothering me, I'm going to turn off game mode. I hate fighting lighting, so I'm going to go to -1 or actually maybe -2 to neutralize my lighting here, maybe -3. And then I'm going to use Control L to get lighting right about there. Okay, that makes it a little easier to see. And let's actually go to the, oh, I'm still in mode here, so that's fine. So now let's go into the curl strength and make that something like 6. And we'll go to curl tiling and dial that back a little bit. And we'll go to curl tiling 2 and dial that up a little bit. And now we're going to go to the terracing. Actually, first we're going to smooth out the outer a little bit, maybe to 70. And then we'll go to terracing and change that to something like 4. And then smooth out the terracing in the center. And that will just give a couple more lines here. And with it, you can get some really cool sort of terrain definition. So I just wanted to show you how I made that terrain patch with this terrain material. Now there's other ways to get additional tiling, and you can tell that it takes a little bit of noodling with these numbers. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to the one that I actually finished for the map before. So this is the one that I already finished. I'm not going to save this. And so this is where I ended up. And you can see that you don't have to be too precious about, how precise you get it. Now I'm going to undo this because I've already fixed this in this level. And now it's overblown. And so now it's time to grab some assets from Qixel Bridge and bring them in here. I'm going to jump back in, and you have to excuse me for rushing because I want to try and actually get closer to the end of this environment. So I identified some things that I really want to bring in here to make this work. So I found this Icelandic rock plate, and I found this Icelandic jagged lava outcropping. And these are the two main pieces of content that I used to generate that environment that I created. And I also used this weathered Icelandic lava spire as the three key elements. And then I also used these wooden sticks and the thatch grass to generate that environment. So as I mentioned to you before, and I'll do it once again, so you have and I also used this Icelandic rock eruption assembly. Really all you have to do if you want any one of these pieces of content, like I showed you with this one, is after you've found it in the online collection and downloaded it, you just click on the export button. So once again, if I click on export, you'll see it starts to pop over here and becomes instantly available to me. So here's the thing, right? Once it becomes available to me here in the library, in my content browser, yes, I can start putting them in here one by one. And you're like, well, that's a pain in the butt. I don't especially enjoy the process of hand placing assets like this. And that can take a long time. So at the end of this presentation, I'm going to share with you a couple of blueprints that one of which I wrote, another one that one of my colleagues wrote, which makes this process a lot easier. So I have a blueprint here. One of them is called Random Scatter. And if I drag this blueprint, what I can do with this blueprint is that this blueprint says, let's use a number of meshes. And I can click on the plus here, and I can assign it a mesh. So one of the meshes was, I believe, this one. And if I click on that mesh, it uses this Icelandic rock plate. And what I can do is distribute that mesh and then change the radius of that mesh. Now, it has a seed value, which allows me to just modify how it distributes that mesh. And it also allows me to change the scale of it a little bit. So I can say I want it to be from 1 to 1 point, let's say 3. And it's worth noting that I don't overdrive these scale values. And I may want a couple more. And I change the seed value. So typically what I would do is find a configuration that I like, and then I nest it into the ground like this. And then push it over. And maybe rotate it. Because what's nice about using the seed value is that you can modify. Sorry, my apologies again. That's another power outage. But it gave me a chance while I was getting it back up to show you that this is roughly where I ended up when I finished scattering all these rocks, right? So you can see that I scattered and scatter, and basically it gives me a ground plane for all the different scattering that I did. Now, there's another tool that I have here, which is a spline tool. And the spline tool allows me to grab the other mesh that I put in. So I drag in this blueprint and I rotate it around in place. And this blueprint allows me to take another one of my Megascan assets, which was the large rock face. Let's see, which one is it? It is the large jagged rock, and pops out the large jagged rock. And if I increase the spacing to something like 2000, and if I grab the endpoint and hold the Alt key, I can start to drag out the spline. And now if I change that spacing down to maybe like 1500, you see it starts to push them together. Maybe I'll change it down to like 1200. It starts to bunch them much closer. So I can slide it in and out. Now, one of the really cool things about this blueprint is that I can change the scale of these rocks. So I might change it to 2 and 2 and 2, and it makes the rocks much bigger. And now I can modify the spacing a little bit more. And once again, this is an easier way to do this placement in general. But one of the other things that's cool about this blueprint is that I can modify the overall scale as randomness, right? So if I change this to 0.3 or 0.5, it gives a random scale just along the z-axis for all of these assets. And one of the nice things is that you can grab any one of the random points and munge them in and out of the ground plane. So by the time I finished placing all of these, let me show you where I got to. So let's see. Here is, that's the landmass, the scatter, and then with the splines in place, I basically got to all of them placed like this. So there's one group placed around in a circle this way. And then I actually used another mesh to place them around in this orientation. And then I took a couple of the separate meshes and just kind of placed them a little bit. So this is a second mesh that I used. This used this mesh. Which was a different mesh that had sort of a spine in the back. So I used two different meshes, one going around one side and the other going around the other side. And then I used a third mesh, this mesh, to make a sort of a figure point at the end. Now, when I had them all placed, it brought me to this sort of position, which is the scattered central piece, which really only took me a few minutes, and the two splines that came around in this shoe with the central piece. Now, the final element was to bring in some of the plants and foliage. So I used mostly thatching grass as well as some of the twigs from Bridge. And for the sake of not having my, well, let me bring up Bridge. Worst thing that happens is that we have to restart again. So as I mentioned before, I used these wood sticks and the thatching grass were the two, really the only two pieces of foliage that I used. So let's open up and see basically that procedure. And there's really nothing you need to do. You go into the foliage mode and you populate the foliage mode with the bits and pieces that you want. So if I want to, I can go in here and select all the foliage, change the density of my brush a little bit, and just click them all on. And if I hold down the Shift key, you can see I can erase a lot of that foliage. But really the process that I went through is that I just wanted to go in and let's deselect all of them and just pick, let's see, this through there. And I turn the density way down to something like 3. And I can go in here and just paint the sticks and a little bit of the thatching grass. Right where there's empty space, right? So the key is not to do too much, to find out where the ground peeks through and to paint some stuff there. And if that density is too low, I can just bring it up to maybe 12. Get some more grass painted in here. And maybe I deselect all the sticks and just turn on the grass. Grass, 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 grass. And if you hover over it, it'll tell you what it is. I don't want that one because that's the Icelandic Rock. I want that one, that one, that one, thatching grass. And I can turn up my density a little bit. And you can see that you can start to paint in what you want. Basically where you want it. So by the time you finish, it becomes pretty straightforward and easy to get what you want. And I made a couple of different maps, sort of using the same thing to show you a couple of different varieties of that look. So here's another sort of configuration. And now the clouds up above are using the new cloud system in 4.26. And finally, the last thing I did here let's see. Maybe I've got the wrong one. Hold on a second. Let me see where that is. I did some background. Let me close this one down. I'm going to show you one final one. Where I did a little bit of extra background work to draw a little skybox in the background, basically using the same techniques. I'm going to open up one final one. So here it is again. And basically I used the same brushes out in the outskirts and just made a ring that sort of encapsulates everything so that when I launch a player into the scene, the player gets a more distant vista. And in this one, I tuned the environmental fog. So we've got some volumetric fog coming into the scene. And I tuned a post-process volume to turn on screen space, ambient occlusion, and screen space global illumination. And you can see the clouds, the new cloud system moving in the distance as well. So this is, probably, I would say overall it took me about 6 hours to make this environment, but mostly because I iterated a fair amount. But I think that the point is that utilizing some tools, the random scatter, and you can see here's the blueprints, random scatter, utilized a couple times, and then the spline tools to generate the surfaces. You can generate environments for virtual production. If you wanted to do a virtual production set like this, it's fairly simple and easy to generate environments like this that are fast and throwaway. But you can also generate these environments for a gameplay if you're ready to, create blocking volumes and, corral a player inside of a space like this from a gameplay perspective as well. Now, the sky atmosphere system, once again, allows you to modify the lighting so you can get some really beautiful vistas in places like this and do some really cool looks for all kinds of things. That's some really interesting lighting that you could get for all kinds of shots. And using photogrammetry and geometry that holds up, for anything like this, you could do a tremendous amount of really beautiful work. And if I hit F11 in my viewport, you can see that with Quixel content and the ease of being able to push one button after you've selected this content and pushed it into Unrealengine, and with a couple of blueprints, generate environments that have depth and atmosphere, can be really powerful and empowering in many ways. So, my job as an evangelist is to show you how you can harness the suite of tools coming into Unrealengine and how useful and easy it is to work with it. And I'm going to close. I think I have 2 minutes left. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and not risk it. I'll hit F11. I'm going to close the engine because I think what's happening is I'm getting some surges. And I'm going to close Bridge. And I'm going to open up Mixer. Now, one of the last things I want to show you is that you can take the rock this is the big rock out in the distance. And one of the things that this is the way that it's naturally scanned. And you can import or open up the ground demo texture that I just created. So let me actually bring it in as a surface because I exported it, right? So this was that ground demo texture that I created. And you can see that I can layer that new ground texture directly onto that rock. So if you really want to create a ground texture, a ground surface, and you want to lay it over top of your rocks, you can do it. Now, this is really harsh, but one thing that you can do is you can come to the albedo of the ground terrain, and you don't have to apply this as a normal multiplier. You can actually put it on as something like a min, and you can see that that starts to blend a lot better with it. And once again, you can change the scale of it. And what's really powerful about Mixer is that it's applying it to the surface in hexaplanar projection, right? And so if I go to PBR mode to albedo mode here, you can also see as I am actually scaling it, how the tiling actually works on this surface. that you can't really see the seams. So if I want to scale this down to be a little bit more scale appropriate, hit the 1 key again, you can see that I can apply it to this big rock, change the contrast a little bit, change the opacity so that it has the same tone as that terrain texture that I created. And then maybe do a couple of other quick operations. I can add a quick little mask stack to it, and maybe go in and find some curvatures, maybe do a little edge highlight to it. And if I go into the 9, I can just find the edges for it. And so maybe it's only applying this to the edges, or maybe invert that and it's not applying it to the edges. And so if I hit the 1 key, it's keeping the edges clean. And so now it's just applying it into the center of the rock and not to the edges. And so if I turn the opacity back up, you can see that this layer is only being applied not to the edges, and it's keeping those edges nice and bright, but instead it's applying it to the outer part. So if I go to max, you can see how that's actually working. So I can modify a 3D asset with this layer that I've created, and now change the opacity a little bit. So you've got a tremendous amount of power in here to really do some nice blending after you've created a 3D texture. I hope that gives you a glimpse into some of the ecosystem tools like Bridge and Mixer. Mixer is a really powerful tool, and I hope you invite me back. We can spend another whole hour inside of Mixer, and I can show you some of the procedural tools inside of here and how they can be used to modify assets like this entirely. But I really wanted to show you, and I'll save this as something so we can kick off from here. I'll share this as Big Rock 2 some point in the future. And I'll reopen. There's one thing I want to share with you all before I leave. That let's see here. I have this project file that I was just sharing with you all is available for you all to download. And I'm looking for the link to it, which I've created. So if you go to this location, you can download that project that I was just showing you, and you can dissect basically all the way that I tiled it, but also the blueprints that I was showing you as well. So you can take a photograph with your phone of that and access it a little bit later. And I thank you very much for your attention. Once again, I apologize for my power outages. You never know when they're going to come and work on the street.
Thank you, Luis, for this amazing presentation. Before we start, I will just let you know how do we work our Zoom Q&A sessions. If you have a question, please raise a hand. Then I will say your name, and then you can unmute yourself and ask the question. There are not a lot of us, so it's going to be okay. And before we begin, Luis, we had one question on our social networks when we posted about the event. So I will read it out for you, and you can answer to it. Some person asked, is there a way to have some preview for assets before buying? What is the payment method, and is there some monthly fee? For example, I'm specifically interested in cloth materials. I need different types of cotton, and I'm currently mixing a bunch of normal maps that I have with different designs, but it would be nice if I didn't have to do it on foot. So that was the question one that we have. Just unmute, please.
The Megascans library can be browsed on Quixel.com. So you can go and browse the Megascans library, and there's a point system. So if you go to Megascans.com, so you don't have to download Bridge and you don't have to download Mixer. You can go to Megascans.com. And if you're not using Unreal Engine, you don't have to sign in. Now we have many surfaces, and there are some fabrics available. So you can see that in the library, there is, if anyone's browsing there, there's a variety of different fabrics, carpet, leather, and, plain fabrics of all different types. And so if anyone goes in, it's going to ask, of course, to sign in, but you can get a preview of it, and you can preview the different renders that are available to it. And without an Unreal Engine account, everything is sort of assigned based on a points system. And so those point systems are basically X number of points, and you purchase points, and based on those points, then you can download until your points are up. And so all that pricing is sort of listed on the Megascans library and the Quixel website. So if people are interested in understanding how to purchase points, they can go and look at the pricing on the Megascans library. But basically every asset you can go and click on and get a preview of those assets before. And in the Fabric library, there's a preview, a free preview, and there's a whole bunch of free assets from every category that they can download a sample of.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Dragan Yerosimovic wanted to ask something, so unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. There was a lot of repetition in textures and geometry in the scene that you've shown. So how is this handled? Does it look natural? So because the assets that you've shown have a lot of detail, they're very specific. And what people usually need for scenes is, maybe individual rocks that they can combine into different, like using this piece of mountain, several times doesn't look so. So how do you handle that?
Well, you can. So the point of what I made was intended to be made in an hour or two. So you can choose the tools that I also demonstrated. You can choose a great variety. So the scatter tool, you can put as many different pieces in there as you want. And the same thing with the spline tool. You can change the number of meshes that you populate it with. So the goal was to make an environment with not that many pieces, but you can put as much or as little content as you want in there. And that's really entirely up to you. With 14,000 assets to choose from, you can choose to spend, hours upon hours building a variety of different content. And it really comes down to your choice, how you assemble that. If you have a little bit of time, you do what you can with the tools that you have. If you have more time, you put more time into it and use more variety. Does that make sense?
Yes. How about the repetition in texture? It's done with layering, I guess, but.
Yeah, and there are also techniques. So when you're tiling a texture, it will tile, right? And so inside of Bridge, you can actually select a surface and it'll tell you if it tiles by 1 meter to 1 meter, 2 meters by 2 meters, 4 meters by 4 meters. So it will tell you how frequently it tiles. And so depending on what you're doing inside of Bridge to get out a less repetitive texture, and then what you do in Mixer to overlay and procedurally break up that tiling, you can reduce the amount of tiling. But tiling texture is a fact of life, right? And so you're going to have to use proceduralism to break up the tiling. And there are techniques that you can use in Unrealengine. There are techniques you can use in other digital content creation tools to overlay noise and other algorithms to make tiling less visually displeasing. But tiling's a reality of life, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else has something to add?
So if I may, I'm sorry that my camera is muted, but just to say thank you for the presentation. I'm actually a sound designer, so I'm here to listen more than to ask.
Sure.
And so just so you know why I'm not asking anything, but I just want to get to know as much on the topic as I can. Developing in Unreal, just to know what my colleagues are doing and how they're achieving it. So thanks for the.
No, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. I may have one question though. Like it might be stupid, but is it possible to import your own stuff and use like just the asset-wise and use the logic of Bridge and Mixer to create with your own patterns, textures, or let's say models?
Sure, great question. I can share my screen in this session, yes? Let me try here. So here in, in Bridge, in your local library, you can import your own meshes and textures, and you can use Bridge to serve textures and that sort of thing to your own digital content creation tools or whatever the case might be. Inside of Mixer, you can also import your own 3D meshes and your own textures. So let's see. Where did my Mixer go? There it is. So inside of Mixer, you can also, let me share again and see what it's doing. Share. What screen are you looking at there? Are you seeing Mixer?
Yep.
Now you see it?
Mm-hmm.
But you also see Zoom?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so this is Mixer here. Right, what are we looking at? My screen's got reversed when I, okay, so there's Mixer.
Yeah.
So if I say File New, say New. So here in the modeling panel, if I wanted to work on a 3D, I can also say bring in a custom mesh. And so now it's going to reach out and ask me where I can import my OBJ or FBX file. So it typically works with FBX. If I wanted to bring in something, you would import your FBX file here and you can work with your own custom FBX. Let me see if I have something that I can bring in. Not there. Data. Static meshes. Multiple assets. I think that file has multiple things. No, I have to find out what version of FBX that exported as, but typically FBX you can import into Mixer and paint inside, and you can create custom IDs for them. And so you can identify material IDs and modify your material IDs based on, modify the mesh based on the material ID as well.
Great. Thanks. That's very, very cool indeed. Thank you, Luis.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Paolo. Please feel free to ask whatever you want. There is no stupid question, right, Luis?
That's correct.
Every question has some point, so.
Was it helpful to see the workflow going into Unreal Engine?
For me, it was. I mean, I was very, it was helpful for myself. I mean, I have colleagues who do the visual side of things that we do. We do virtual production and VR and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also for them, it was very interesting to see how, what your pipeline is from terrain creation, material creation in the landscape, and so on. I think for myself as well, it was very, very useful.
What kind of work are you all doing there? So there's virtual production. I presume are there game studios there that are represented in this call? Mostly virtual production studios?
So because nobody else is talking, I'm going to continue.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah, so I'm from the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in Belgrade, so I'm actually in academia.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lab that does interactive arts. It's called the Interactive Arts Lab, and we do, whatever we see fit in a certain time frame in the widest possible area of interactive arts, from immersive theater to virtual production to video games, I don't know, virtual reality experiences and so on, XR.
Awesome, yeah.
Yeah.
And George Markovic said, indie game dev here. So we have someone from gaming.
And also sound. Some folks don't have microphone.
Yeah. I can read the question out loud from the chat so you can answer if you like. But
advice for the best learning paths for 3D artists into environment design. So we have some good material. So let me see. I'll share again my screen. So Unreal Epic Games has learn.unrealengine.com. Oh, and you got to sign in. I'll sign in with that one. So this is a curated learning material from Epic Games, which has a huge variety of course content. So if you go into the course library, I would presume that you all are aware of this. A huge number of courses available through Epic Games, virtual production primer courses, Unreal Engine Kickstarter, lighting techniques, animation techniques, tiling textures, material workflows. There's some very long, very informative courses here on our material system, our rendering system, packaging, games. There are learning paths for all different types. So you'll see that there's broadcast and live events, film and television, foundations, game development, learning extras, including this huge Kickstarter set of courses. And these are really powerful because it takes you through, the massive 8 hours worth of learning material about everything from rendering to the engine structure, to the animation, to blueprints, understanding everything about blueprints, characters, materials, and so forth. So I would start at the beginning in a place like this. And if you are not familiar with Unreal Engine at all, I would take some of these, you know, Unreal Engine, your first hour in Unreal Engine. I did a course in here for Unreal Engine, getting started with Unreal Engine, and then try not to jump into the deep end because it can be a little frustrating. Unreal Engine is very wide and very deep. There are some Quixel courses in here as well. So there is, you know, I'd say that this is another thing that's really important. If you're interested in learning more about Quixel, I would go to the YouTube channel and go, actually the easiest way to get to it is get to it through something like Bridge. If you go to help, and you can get to it through many of our collections, there are tutorial sections here. So this is really one of the best things, is to go to, for instance, this deserted medieval village. If you go to the video library here, this is fantastic, right? Because this whole thing takes you through the whole building of this environment. So this is something that was recently released on the marketplace, this whole medieval village. And one of the really great things, if you appreciate the style that this was built in, is that there is a whole series of videos, a 5-6 video series of the entire building, from the block out to how the house was made using the polygonal modeling tools in Unreal Engine, including the thatched roof, how the foliage was done, how the set dressing was done, how the lighting was done, and then all the way to now a video series about how the scene was optimized. So I think that, you know, environments come together with many, many bits and pieces. So, you know, putting together an environment, even like the environment that I was showing you today, is a lots of small things that come together to make, you know, something larger. So I would presume that many of you who have spent some time in Unreal Engine understand that, and that you can appreciate all the different small things that come together to finish that out. So you can see that there's fog in here. There's you know, all the different bits and pieces of lighting, atmosphere, not just the Quixel assets that make up these elements. You've got your post-process volumes and directional lights and skies and clouds and so on.
Okay, we have a question in the chat. Vanya says, thanks for the presentation. And please, can you tell me how to optimize UE file so we can upload it to the internet?
How do you optimize an Unreal Engine file to upload to the internet? Well, I think that one of the things is to get rid of the things you don't need in a project file, right? And so there's many different ways to approach getting things that you don't need from a project. So if I share my screen again, if you have a map like this, you know, and that's kind of a big question, right? So a project can be any number of things. In this particular case, this is just a map file or a series of map files, and these map files contain actors, and these actors live in these folders, right? So one thing that I can do is that I can look at a map and I can find out and identify all the things that exist in this map, right? I can do a reference view of everything that's in there. And then I can also filter for all the things. So if I look at the other filters, I can think, let me see if I can find it. There's a way to filter for everything that's in a particular level. And there's also a way to view everything that's in a particular level. But one of the easiest things to do is if I wanted, for instance, to just export this level with all the things that are associated with it is, and one of the cleanest things to do is to migrate this level. So typically what I will do is I'll create a blank project. So I'll go into new project and have nothing in there, no templates of any kind. And then I'll go in and I'll say right click, asset action, migrate, and I will migrate this level into the new project. And what that will do is it'll take this level, it'll find only the assets that are relevant to this level and push them into the new project, and not any of the things that I don't need. Because if I were to open this project and start deleting things from it, it's very common to leave around what's known as redirectors and other things that can sometimes just leave digital footprints inside of an Unreal Engine project, U assets and, you know, material redirectors. And the reason is because if I open up the reference viewer for this, the reference viewer shows you all the different bits and pieces that are related to it. And you can see that there's no cactus in here, but there's still a reference to this cactus. And this is just one level depth. If I increase the depth of it, you know, there's pretty significant depth of all the things that this level references. And that's not even all the textures and materials. So sometimes the easiest way to get rid of things you don't need is just to migrate the map into a whole new fresh project, and then go into that project and make sure that it is clean. Another way to do it is to then go to that project and say package by saying zip up a project after you've done it, and then that'll get rid of a bunch of other things you don't need, right? So right now, if I go into the content folder here and I go to Explorer, show and Explorer, one thing that you'll see is that it's got my content folder, it's got a drive data cache, it's got an intermediate folder, saved folder, scripts, and so forth. The saved folder is a big bloated folder. The intermediate folder is a big bloated folder. The only thing I need to upload to the internet would be my U project, my content folder, and my config folder. My cache, my intermediate folder, saved folder, and scripts folder, I don't need to save to the internet. The only folders I need to recreate this is my U project, content, and configs. So if you package this, if you say file, package, zip up project, it'll create a zip with just the folders that I need. And that'll make it nice and compressed and much easier to send to the internet. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, Maya said thanks, and Anna also said thanks. She didn't know about Quixel tutorials, so thanks for sharing that with us. I would have one question, maybe not a direct one, but since I used earlier Maya and Substance Painter, and now I discuss it with my colleague Milena, what is the main difference between Substance Painter, for example, for making textures, and Bridge and Mixer?
I'd say that they both have a Mixer and Substance Painter have a fairly different footprint, the way that they approach proceduralism. I think that Mixer is not node-based, at least currently, in the way that Substance is very node-based. Mixer really carries over very much a Photoshop paradigm. And I think that there are a lot of similarities, but I like to think about Mixer very much like you would think about Photoshop in many ways. And they really are quite different in so many different ways. So, you know, I think about Substance Painter and Substance Designer. There are some really wonderful tools in there. You can't paint, well, you can sort of paint directly. You can paint masks inside of Mixer, but there's so many things that you can do in Substance, and the node-based workflows inside of Substance. You can do some of that stuff inside of Mixer, but it works like a layer in Photoshop. And then you've got masks inside of Mixer, very much like you have in Photoshop. And then you also have layers very much like you have in Photoshop. And that's a very different paradigm than I think you have in Substance. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So I think quite a paradigm shift.
yeah, it seems to me that Mixer is a bit more intuitive, you know, for a user.
It can be if you're coming from a Photoshop background. There's a lot of things, you know, and there's some things, and I have not spent a lot of time in Substance, so that can be really difficult in other tools. And, you know, I can give you some examples, right? So let me
Yeah.
share. So if I'm here inside of Mixer and I open up a 3D file. So if I go to 3D assets, and let's open up from my local library this big 3D rock. So this is a, you know, one of the Nordic rock things, and it's really cool. And I can go, and so once again, you're working with layers here, right? So I can go in and open up a completely different rock layer, right? So I can sort of find this Icelandic rock, and I can bring in this rock layer, and it comes in as a completely different rock layer. And I can sort of change the wrap to underlying and the threshold, and you can sort of see how it inflates it. I've got full control of the displacement of it and the height frequency, and you can sort of see how it influences it. But one of the things that I can also do is change right along the way in the albedo is that it applies it normal, or I can subtract it and get this really interesting look.
Yeah.
I can multiply it so I can get a very interesting look from it. And so this is very much a Photoshop paradigm. I can max it. I can min it. And so now I've got some really interesting options here. And I can also go in and put a stack modifier on there. So add a mask stack. So that gives me a mask, very much like Photoshop has a mask, right?
Yeah.
And so now I've got all these other operations. I can put a curvature modifier on it. And now if I hit 9 on my key, you can see that it's found all the edges for this. And so I can say, find all the cavities for it. And this is really a powerful workflow. And I can change and tighten those cavities, and I can invert them. So now it found all the outer or inner, right? So this is really pretty cool. And if I go back, now it's applying this rock just to the outer, but I can go back and invert that, just apply it so that it keeps the. Now, if I wanted to go in, I can add another layer, right? And say, let's find some moss. So if I find some moss, and I can find moss and bring it in, and I can change the scale of this moss. And so let's go in and create another stack on it. And let's say I want to find this moss and put a normal, or maybe even a position gradient, so that it just starts to put it on the top of it, right? So if I hit the 9, you can see that with this position gradient, I can just slide it up to the top. So if I hit the 1 key, now the moss is just on the top, but on top of the, I can put a normal modifier. So if I hit the 9 key now and start to slide this, I can now angle the remaining moss, just the top, and maybe even change my position gradient so that it is not quite so drastic. So now it's going to find, but I also don't want to put that as normal. I want to add it. Right, so now it's not only going to do a normal application, but it's going to add it on top of the position gradient. Or maybe I want to multiply it, right? So this is what makes it so much Photoshop-like. So now you can see both of them working together in complement. So there are some things that it does very similar. And what's really cool is that this all works in complement. So now I've got the moss sitting on top of this rock. And then I can go back here and say, well, you know, I changed the threshold. Maybe bring it in from above, bring it in from below. Get some really interesting looks. And once you're satisfied with what you're achieving here, you can take these layers and you can group them and call this my rock tweak.
My mossy rock.
My mossy rock. And you can export this as a smart material. And so if you like what you've done here, you can go back and change this model to anything you want. So if I want to change that to something else, I can bring in this thing. And now my mossy rock is being applied to this. And so here it is originally, but here's my mossy rock applied to this. And if I wanted to go in and modify the range at which moss is appearing on it, I can modify that. And so that becomes really powerful as well. So once again, it shares a lot of similarities, but also because it's doing it in much more of a Photoshop-like way, it can be really powerful and non-destructive. And one of the other things I'll add is that, you know, these smart materials, the engine ships, not the engine, but Mixer ships with tons of them, right? So if I come in here and look, it ships with 200 smart materials. So if I come in here to smart materials and look for rock smart materials, these are some of the rock smart materials. So here's some more moss, rock moss. So here's Icelandic, here's old beach, here's beach rock, here's mossy Icelandic rock. So if I bring that in, I can see what Icelandic rock looks like. Let's see if what it did here. There it is. Oh, I see. It brought it in and it's turned off. So let's bring it up top here. So there's Icelandic rock applied to the whole thing. And then once again, these are non-destructive operations, and you can see the stack here, and you can go in and say, well, that's a little too much. Let's go in and change how much moss is going on here, and I can lighten that up. Here's my base rock, and you can say, well, my base rock, I don't really like that base gray tone. I can change that and make it more orange, or, you know, reddish or whatever base color you want to make it, say apply. And with regard to the moss, I want the moss to be a little bit more grungy or less grungy. So you've got full control of all the proceduralism and non-destructiveness of it. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it takes time for someone to just start and play with all of those features and then to see how to make it look like more natural. But it's okay. Thank you. Thank you for answering to my question. Boy, I just wanted to thank you for this very useful presentation and information.
Yeah, my pleasure. So on top of the tutorials that I showed you on the medieval website, if you go, let me show you one last thing. And I'm going to share one more thing with you all. If you go to the Quixel website, Mixer has a huge amount of tutorials that take you through all the different bits and pieces, right? So Mixer fundamentals, but there's also projection mode, patterns, pattern components, noise, scattering, circular transform. So there's a lot of things that you can build purely procedurally inside of Mixer, which is really quite powerful. Creating textures, how to render outside of Mixer and so forth. So these are really powerful just in understanding the workflows. And then there's some that take you through the whole process of making very specific type surfaces, as well as exporting from within there and creating custom blends, working with Blender. Some really great tutorials within the website here. And not only for that, but also for Mixer and Blender and Bridge, as well as some very specific tutorials for some of the other environments that are available for free. Because there's some absolutely gorgeous environments. There's another environment, which is this one called the Goddess Temple, as well as an abandoned apartment. So these are really stunning environments done by some of our artists, including very stylized environments. So be sure to check those out.
Thank you. I think this is one of the most useful things, especially for the beginners, maybe. Okay, anyone else? Until we change our minds. Dragan is also saying thanks for the presentation. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, we can end this Q&A session. I would like to thank you, Luis, again for sharing the knowledge, being true evangelist for all of us tonight, and to thank everyone who joined us to the presentation and to the Q&A. You can follow us on social media, like and subscribe, Creator Training Center and CGA, so you can be informed about our next events. That's all for tonight. Thank you again, and goodbye.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.